The morning sun over the city did not merely shine upon Arthur Pendelton's penthouse, it seemed to ask for permission to enter. Perched 80 floors above the bustling metropolis, the residence was a three-tiered monument to modern wealth. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of the skyline, framing a world that Arthur practically owned. Inside, the air was perpetually climate-controlled to a crisp 70 degrees, carrying the faint, bespoke scent of cedarwood and bergamot. Arthur stood by the glass, a cup of black coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. At 34, he was the founder and CEO of Pendelton Technologies, a man whose net worth was calculated with a B and regularly updated on the Forbes real-time tracker. He was a man of data, algorithms, and absolute control. Yet, as he looked over his empire, his chest felt tight. Behind him, the soft rustle of thousand-thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets signaled that Chloe was awake. Arthur, her voice was a velvet purr, rich and meticulously modulated. He turned. Chloe was sitting up in the massive king-sized bed, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair cascading over her bare shoulders. Even upon waking, she looked like she belonged on the cover of Vogue. She was a gallery curator when they met, a woman of impeccable taste, sharp wit, and an ethereal beauty that had completely disarmed him. For the past 2 years, she had been his glamorous counterpart, the ultimate prize he had won after a decade of grueling, lonely work building his company from a dusty garage. "Good morning, beautiful," Arthur said, forcing a warm smile as he walked over to kiss her forehead. "Are we still on for the florist at noon?" she asked, casually tracing the rim of her empty water glass. "The event planner says if we don't finalize the imported white orchids from Thailand today, they won't clear customs in time for the reception." The wedding. It was exactly 4 weeks away, a $5 million destination extravaganza in Lake Como, Italy. 300 guests, a Michelin-starred chef, and a custom-designed Vera Wang gown that cost more than most people's homes. "I'll have my assistant clear my schedule for the afternoon," Arthur promised. "But first, I have the meeting with Marcus and the legal team at 10. A fleeting shadow crossed Chloe's flawless face, so quick Arthur almost missed it. "The prenuptial agreement," she murmured, the velvet edge of her voice hardening slightly. "It's just a formality, Chloe. You know that. The board insists on it to protect the company's stock," Arthur said gently, though he felt a familiar, uncomfortable twinge in his gut. "I know, darling. It's just business," she smiled, but the warmth did not reach her piercing blue eyes. 2 hours later, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom of Pendelton Technologies was anything but warm. The room was a stark contrast to the penthouse, cold steel, polished obsidian, and sharp angles. Arthur sat at the head of the long conference table. To his right was Marcus Thorne, Arthur's CFO and oldest friend, a man whose cynical outlook was matched only by his brilliance with numbers. Across from them sat 3 high-priced corporate lawyers, looking like vultures in custom-tailored suits. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and Chloe entered. She was dressed in a sharp, pearl-white Chanel suit, looking every inch the billionaire's soon-to-be wife. She smiled graciously at the lawyers, took a seat next to Arthur, and crossed her legs. "Let's get this over with, shall we?" she said lightly, accepting the thick stack of papers a lawyer slid across the table. For the first 20 minutes, things proceeded smoothly. Chloe nodded along as the lawyers explained the standard clauses regarding property divisions, the protection of Arthur's intellectual property, and the safeguarding of his premarital assets. But then, the lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Sterling, cleared his throat. Moving on to Section 4, Clause B. The alimony cap in the event of a dissolution of marriage within the first 5 years. Chloe's manicured finger stopped tracing the edge of the paper. "I'm sorry, the what?" Sterling adjusted his glasses. "It stipulates that should the marriage end in divorce before your 5th anniversary, your spousal support would be capped at $2 million total, with no claim to the properties acquired during that time. It is a standard protective measure, Ms. Hastings. The silence that followed was suffocating. Arthur watched Chloe. Her posture remained perfect, but her knuckles turned white as she gripped the leather armrests of her chair. 2 million, Chloe repeated, her voice eerily calm. She turned slowly to Arthur. Arthur, is this your idea? Chloe, it's standard procedure. Marcus and the legal team. I am not marrying Marcus or the legal team. Chloe snapped, her voice suddenly cracking like a whip. The suddenness of her anger startled everyone in the room. She dropped the pen she was holding, it clattered loudly against the obsidian table. $2 million. After I am expected to put my entire career on hold to be the face of your philanthropy? To manage your households? To host your investors? Chloe, please, let's not do this here, Arthur whispered, feeling a flush of embarrassment. No, let's do it here, she retorted, her eyes flashing with a cold, terrifying calculation. If we divorce in 4 years, I leave with a fraction of what you make in a month. This isn't a marriage contract, Arthur. This is a severance package for a low-level employee. Marcus leaned forward, his dark eyes fixed on Chloe. With all due respect, Ms. Hastings, $2 million is a substantial amount of money. And if you have no intention of leaving Arthur, the clause is entirely irrelevant. Chloe glared at Marcus with absolute venom before suddenly covering her face with her hands. When she looked up at Arthur, the anger was gone, replaced by brimming, devastating tears. It's not about the money, Arthur, she sobbed softly, her voice breaking perfectly. It's about trust. You don't trust me. You sit here with your lawyers, treating me like a gold digger who's trying to steal from you. How am I supposed to walk down the aisle knowing you think so little of my love for you? Arthur's heart twisted. The sight of her crying shattered his defenses. He immediately reached out, pulling her into his side. Hey, no, that's not true. I trust you completely. I love you. He glared at the lawyers. Strike the clause. Remove the 5-year cap entirely. Arthur, I strongly advise against. Sterling began. I said strike it, Arthur ordered, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Chloe buried her face in his shoulder, her tears wetting his expensive suit. But as Arthur held her, he happened to catch Marcus's eye. The CFO was staring at him with a look of profound, silent pity. And in that moment, a dark, insidious seed of doubt was planted deep in Arthur's mind. 30 minutes later, the revised contract was signed. Chloe, her tears magically dried and her radiant smile restored, kissed Arthur deeply and left the office to go to the florist. Arthur remained in the boardroom alone with Marcus. The silence stretched between them until Marcus finally walked over to the corner bar and poured 2 fingers of neat scotch. He slid one glass across the table to Arthur. You're making a mistake, Jules, Marcus said quietly, taking a sip. Arthur rubbed his temples, a headache beginning to pound behind his eyes. She was hurt, Marcus. I made her feel like a transaction. She was furious because you tried to cap her payout, Marcus corrected bluntly. Arthur, I've known you since we were eating instant ramen in a dorm room. You're a genius. You can see a flaw in 3 million lines of code. How can you be so blind to the glaring bugs in your own relationship? She loves me. She loves your Black American Express card. She loves the penthouse. She loves the fact that being Mrs. Arthur Pendelton makes her royalty in the city. Marcus slammed his glass down. Did you see her eyes when Sterling read that number? That wasn't a woman heartbroken by a lack of trust. That was a woman calculating her return on investment. Arthur wanted to yell at Marcus, to defend the woman he was about to marry, but the words died in his throat. His analytical mind, the very thing that had made him a billionaire, was running the data. Chloe's sudden mood shift. The precision of her tears. The fact that she had never once asked about his day without following it up with a request for a vacation, a piece of jewelry, or an introduction to a powerful contact. What if you're right? Arthur whispered, the realization making him feel physically sick. The wedding is in a month. The invitations are out. The press is all over it. If I cancel now without proof, I'm the villain. And if I marry her, I might be signing my own death warrant. Marcus sighed, leaning against the glass wall. You need to know for sure. You need a stress test. You stress test your software before a launch to see if it breaks under pressure, right? You need to stress test your fiancée. Arthur looked up. How? Take away the one thing she might actually be in love with, Marcus said evenly. Take away the money. For the next 2 hours, Arthur and Marcus did not work on tech development or corporate acquisitions. They plotted. It was a crazy, desperate plan, but Arthur knew it was the only way to find the truth before tying himself to Chloe for life. Marcus, utilizing his position as CFO, would help Arthur fabricate a catastrophic financial disaster. They would concoct a story of a massive, undetected embezzlement ring within the company's offshore accounts, triggered by a rogue former partner. They would draft fake SEC investigation notices. They would make it look as though Pendelton Technologies was not just bankrupt, but that Arthur was personally liable for hundreds of millions in debt. I'll have the fake documents drawn up by tonight, Marcus said, typing furiously on his laptop. I'll freeze your personal accounts, temporarily move the funds to a secure, unlisted trust so your cards will actually decline. If she checks your balances, she'll see zeros. If she asks your lawyers, I'll have sterling in on it. He owes us. Arthur stared at his reflection in the polished obsidian table. He felt a mixture of dread and dark anticipation. If she stayed, if she held his hand and told him they would rebuild together, he would give her the world. He would apologize for the deception and give her everything she ever wanted. But if she ran? By 6 o'clock that evening, the trap was set. Arthur stood outside the heavy oak doors of his penthouse. He took a deep breath. He took off his custom silk tie and shoved it into his pocket. He unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt and violently ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair until he looked disheveled, manic, and broken. He practiced the look of a ruined man. He pushed the door open. The penthouse smelled of truffles and expensive champagne. Chloe was sitting on the white velvet sofa, a glass of Dom Perignon in hand, laughing lightly into her phone as she finalized the seating chart for their celebrity guests. She looked up as Arthur entered, her smile faltering at the sight of his ruined appearance. Arthur, she asked, lowering the phone. Darling, what's wrong? You look awful. Arthur closed the door behind him. He let his briefcase drop to the marble floor with a heavy, final thud. He looked his beautiful fiancée dead in the eyes, ready to drop the bomb that would either save their marriage, or destroy it entirely. Chloe, his voice cracked perfectly. It's gone. It's all gone. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint, rhythmic bubbling of the custom-built-in aquarium behind the wet bar. Arthur's words "it's gone. It's all gone" seemed to hang in the climate-controlled air like a physical weight, dragging the room's opulent atmosphere down into the dark. Chloe slowly lowered her phone. The glowing screen, still displaying the seating chart for the Lake Como reception, illuminated the sudden pallor of her face. She looked at Arthur's dropped briefcase, then back up to his disheveled hair and loosened collar. For a long, agonizing moment, her brain seemed incapable of processing the data. Arthur, darling, you're not making any sense, she said, her voice a fragile, breathy whisper. She forced a small, strained laugh that sounded entirely hollow. What is gone? Did Marcus lose a client? Is the stock dipping again? You know I don't understand the technical jargon when you get worked up. Arthur stepped further into the room, his movements deliberately slow and heavy. He slumped into one of the Barcelona chairs opposite the velvet sofa, burying his face in his hands. He forced a dry sob, leaning into the performance with everything he had. "Not a client, Chloe." "Everything," Arthur murmured, looking up at her through his fingers. He made sure his eyes conveyed absolute despair. "The European division, my former partner, the one who left last year. He didn't just leave. He set up a shadow corporation. He's been funneling corporate funds, leveraging our core patents against phantom loans. The SEC raided the London office this morning. The board just held an emergency meeting." Chloe's perfect posture dissolved. The glass of Dom Perignon slipped from her manicured fingers, falling onto the pristine white Persian rug. The expensive champagne soaked into the fibers, but for the first time since she had moved in, she didn't even glance at the stain. "The SEC?" she repeated, the color draining entirely from her cheeks. But you're the CEO. You're shielded. Your personal assets are held in the trust." "Tell me they're in the trust, Arthur." Her immediate jump to his personal wealth, rather than his personal well-being, felt like a physical blow to his chest. He swallowed hard, pushing the hurt down and feeding it into his character. "I signed as a personal guarantor on the bridge loans to keep the expansion quiet," Arthur lied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it was safe. It was supposed to be a standard maneuver. But with the embezzlement, the debt has defaulted. The banks are calling in the loans, Chloe. All of them." He watched her eyes dart frantically around the room, taking in the original Picasso on the wall, the grand piano, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Billionaire's row. "What does that mean?" she asked, her tone sharpening, the velvety purr replaced by a cold, metallic edge. "Spell it out for me, Arthur." "It means my accounts are frozen," he said softly. "The black card, the platinum accounts. They're locking it all down pending the federal investigation. They're going to seize the company. And when they're done with that, they're going to take the penthouse. The cars. Everything." Chloe stood up so fast she nearly tripped over the coffee table. She paced toward the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if she were suddenly freezing. "No. No, this is impossible. You're Arthur Pendelton. You have lawyers. You have fixers. Call Sterling. Fix this." Sterling was the one who delivered the news, Arthur said, dropping his head back against the leather chair. "It's a federal mandate, Chloe. There's no fixing it. Not quickly, anyway. I'm facing hundreds of millions in debt. I'm ruined." He waited for her to rush to him. He waited for her to kneel beside his chair, wrap her arms around him, and tell him that they would survive this. He waited for the woman he was supposed to marry to say that the money didn't matter, that they had each other. She didn't move. Instead, she stood with her back to him, staring out at the city lights. When she finally spoke, her voice was entirely devoid of emotion. "And the wedding?" Arthur closed his eyes. "The final nail in the coffin. Lake Como is off. The event planner's final deposit was supposed to clear tomorrow. The accounts are frozen. We can't pay for the flights, let alone the villa. We have to cancel it, Chloe." He paused, forcing a note of desperate hope into his voice. "But we still have the license. We can go down to the courthouse on Friday. We can still be married. We don't need the circus. We just need us." Chloe turned around. The look in her eyes was something Arthur had never seen before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was sheer, unadulterated panic, mixed with a chilling revulsion. She looked at him not as a partner in pain, but as a sinking ship that was threatening to drag her under. "A courthouse," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "You want me to cancel a $5 million wedding, Call 300 of the most influential people in the world to tell them my fiancé is a broke fraud, and then stand in a municipal building next to people fighting over traffic tickets. Chloe. Arthur started, genuinely shocked by the venom in her delivery. I have a migraine, she interrupted sharply, holding a hand to her temple. I can't look at you right now, Arthur. I can't look at this. Without another word, she turned and practically fled down the grand hallway toward the master suite. A moment later, the heavy mahogany door slammed shut, followed by the distinct click of the lock. Arthur sat alone in the dimming light of the penthouse. He looked at the spilled champagne on the rug. The silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of a carefully constructed illusion shattering into a million pieces. Marcus had been right. It had only taken 10 minutes of poverty to break a 2-year romance. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological torture. When morning broke, the atmosphere in the penthouse was toxic. Chloe emerged from the guest bedroom having refused to sleep in the master suite with him fully dressed in dark, oversized sunglasses and a trench coat. She didn't offer a good morning. I need the car, she demanded, pouring herself a black coffee. I have meetings. I had to let Thomas go, Arthur said, referring to their private chauffeur, as he sat at the kitchen island nursing a mug of cheap tap water. The leasing company came for the Maybach this morning. You'll have to take an Uber. Chloe froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Slowly, she lowered it. An Uber, she repeated, the disgust practically vibrating in her throat. I am wearing a $10,000 Chanel coat, and you want me to sit in the back of a Prius that smells like cheap air freshener. My credit cards are declining, Chloe. I literally cannot pay for a black car service, Arthur said, maintaining his weary, defeated persona. Can't you use your own card? She glared at him over the rim of her sunglasses. My gallery salary barely covers my personal maintenance, Arthur, as you well know. You were supposed to take care of me. She slammed the mug onto the marble counter, splashing hot coffee. Fine. I'll call a cab. Don't wait up. That became the new normal. The loving, supportive fiancé vanished entirely, replaced by a bitter, resentful roommate who treated Arthur like an inconvenience. The mask was completely off. By the third day, the complaints escalated into outright cruelty. When Arthur suggested they order cheap takeout for dinner instead of their usual private chef, Chloe laughed mockingly. I'm not eating greasy noodles out of a cardboard box, Arthur. I'm going out. With who? Arthur asked, playing the part of the anxious, insecure partner. Friends, she snapped, adjusting her diamond earrings in the foyer mirror. People who actually still have their lives together. I am networking, Arthur. Someone has to figure out a solution to this nightmare you've dragged us into. Someone has to find a way to maintain our image before the press catches wind that you're a beggar. Chloe, we're supposed to get married in 3 weeks, Arthur said, his voice dropping. At the courthouse. We need to plan. I don't want to hear the word courthouse again. She screamed, spinning around, her composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? My mother has already bought her dress. My friends have already booked their private jets to Italy. And now I have to tell them that the tech genius I was marrying is a complete idiot who got scammed out of his own company. She took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothing down her designer dress. I am going out. Fix your mess, Arthur. Because I will not be the wife of a bankrupt loser. The door slammed behind her, echoing through the empty, cavernous penthouse. Arthur stood frozen in the foyer. The pain of her words stung, but beneath the sting, a cold, calculated fury was beginning to take root. He walked over to his study, locked the door, and pulled out his encrypted secondary laptop, the one Marcus had set up, completely bypassed from the frozen accounts. He opened a secure messaging app and typed a quick note to Marcus. You were right. It's worse than we thought. A moment later, Marcus replied. I told you. What's the next move? Arthur stared at the screen, his jaw set. He had his answer, but now, he wanted to see exactly how deep her betrayal ran. He typed his response, his fingers hitting the keys with deliberate force. Hire a private investigator. A good one. I want to know exactly who she's networking with every night, and I want to know what she's planning to do with that 5-carat ring I bought her. He closed the laptop. The Arthur Pendelton who was blindly in love was dead. The ruthless CEO who built an empire from nothing had returned, and he was ready to dismantle Chloe Hastings piece by piece. The rain in the city that Tuesday matched the bleak, suffocating atmosphere inside Arthur Pendelton's study. It battered against the reinforced, floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse, blurring the neon lights of the metropolis into streaks of bleeding color. Arthur sat in the darkness, the only illumination coming from the harsh, blue glow of his encrypted secondary laptop and a single, brass desk lamp. He was waiting. For the past week, his life had devolved into a masterclass of psychological warfare. Chloe had practically moved into the guest wing of the penthouse, treating Arthur with a mixture of open disdain and toxic pity. She spent her days networking, ostensibly looking for a lifeline for them both, and her nights returning smelling of expensive wine, rare steaks, and a faint, unfamiliar men's cologne. At exactly 9 p.m., a soft, rhythmic knock sounded at the private service entrance of the penthouse, an entrance entirely bypassed by the building's main concierge, accessible only by a dedicated elevator. Arthur stood up, adjusting his dark sweater, and opened the door. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was Elias. He was a man devoid of distinguishing features, medium height, medium build, wearing an unremarkable gray trench coat. He was the most expensive private investigator on the East Coast, a former intelligence officer who specialized in corporate espionage and high-net-worth infidelities. Elias didn't offer a greeting. He simply stepped inside, shook the rain from his coat, and handed Arthur a thick, heavy manila envelope. I prefer digital files, Elias, Arthur said, his voice flat, though his heart hammered a heavy, painful rhythm against his ribs. Digital leaves traces, Mr. Pendelton. Even with your encryption, Elias replied, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. When dealing with high-profile subjects, physical paper is the only true ghost. You'll want to look at these sitting down. Arthur led Elias into the study, closing and locking the heavy oak door. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, the wood cold beneath his forearms. He stared at the manila envelope for a long moment. It felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. With a deep breath, he pulled the string, unwound it, and tipped the contents onto the desk. Dozens of high-resolution, glossy photographs spilled out, accompanied by a meticulously typed chronological log. She's been busy, Elias said quietly, taking a seat opposite Arthur and steepling his fingers. Let's start with her daytime activities. Thursday afternoon. 2:00 p.m. Arthur pulled the first stack of photos closer to the lamp. They showed Chloe in the city's Diamond District. She was attempting to be discreet, wearing large, dark Givenchy sunglasses and a silk scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, but the camera's telephoto lens caught her perfectly. She was entering the heavily fortified doors of Chrysler & Sons, one of the most exclusive, discreet diamond brokers in the world, a place that dealt in liquidating high-value assets for the desperate elite. She stayed in there for 45 minutes, Elias narrated, his tone clinically detached. I have a contact inside. She was trying to offload the engagement ring. The 5-carat flawless emerald cut. Arthur felt a cold spike of nausea. Did she sell it? No, Elias shook his head. Chrysler recognized the stone immediately. You had it custom lasered with a micro serial number, remember? It's highly traceable. Because of the rumors regarding your current financial freeze, Chrysler didn't want the liability of fencing a potentially seized asset. He offered her 20 cents on the dollar, in cash, under the table. And she threw a tantrum. Called him a thief, screamed that the platinum setting alone was worth more than his life, and stormed out. Elias pointed to a photo of Chloe exiting the shop, her face twisted into an ugly, furious snarl that Arthur had never seen before. She still has the ring. She's just waiting to find a shoddier buyer. Arthur swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising in his throat. She wasn't just leaving him, she was actively trying to strip him of whatever value she could carry in her purse before the ship sank. That's just the appetizer, Mr. Pendelton, Elias said softly, leaning forward. Look at the Friday and Saturday night files. Arthur pushed the Diamond District photos aside and pulled the next stack toward the light. The setting was different. It was the valet entrance of L'Orangerie, a Michelin 3-star restaurant where a reservation took 6 months to secure and a bottle of wine cost more than a mid-sized sedan. The first photo showed Chloe stepping out of a black Mercedes Maybach. The second photo showed a man stepping out behind her, placing a familiar, proprietary hand on the small of her back. Arthur's breath hitched. He felt as though the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. The man in the photo was impeccably dressed in a bespoke Italian suit, his dark hair slicked back, a heavy gold Rolex flashing on his wrist. He was smiling down at Chloe, a slick, predatory, arrogant smile. Richard, Arthur breathed, the name tasting like poison. Richard Pendelton was Arthur's first cousin. While Arthur had grown up middle class, fighting tooth and nail, coding in garages to build his empire from the ground up, Richard had inherited a real estate dynasty. Richard was old money, deeply insecure about Arthur's self-made brilliance, and the two had been locked in a bitter, unspoken rivalry since childhood. Richard had always hated that Arthur eclipsed him in the Forbes rankings. They had a private dining room, Elias continued, mercilessly delivering the facts. 3 hours on Friday. 4 hours on Saturday. They left together both nights. They went to his penthouse on Park Avenue. She didn't leave until 3:00 a.m. Arthur stared at a close-up shot of the two of them walking into the restaurant. Chloe was gazing up at Richard. It was the exact same look of total adoration, the same starry-eyed devotion she used to give Arthur when he closed a massive tech acquisition. She's networking, she had said. She wasn't networking. She was securing a new host. The second Arthur's accounts froze, Chloe had immediately sought out the nearest, wealthiest safe harbor. And out of everyone in the city, she chose the one man whose involvement would humiliate Arthur the most. There's one more thing, Elias said, interrupting Arthur's spiraling thoughts. The Pi reached into his coat pocket and produced a small, silver USB drive. He placed it carefully on top of the photographs. I intercepted this yesterday. Your fiancée has been careless with her cloud syncing. She left a voice memo on her iPad while she was in the back of a cab. It was sent to her mother's secure line. Arthur stared at the USB drive. He almost didn't want to hear it. The photos were enough. The ring was enough. But his analytical mind, the CEO within him, demanded complete data. He needed to know the full extent of the rot. He plugged the drive into his encrypted laptop. A single audio file appeared on the screen. He clicked play. The audio was crisp, though there was the faint hum of city traffic in the background. Then, Chloe's voice filled the silent study. It wasn't the sweet, modulated tone she used with him. It was sharp, cold, and dripping with venom. Mom, stop panicking. I have it under control, Chloe's voice snapped through the speakers. There was a pause, presumably her mother speaking on the other end. I know. It's a disaster. Chloe hissed. The idiot leveraged his personal assets against his company. He's a complete fraud. He's facing federal charges, Mom. They're going to take the penthouse. They're taking the cars. I am not spending the best years of my life visiting a pathetic loser in a white-collar prison. Arthur closed his eyes, his hands balling into fists so tight his knuckles cracked. Pathetic loser. No, I haven't dumped him yet, Chloe's voice continued, a dark, calculating edge creeping in. If I walk away now, right when he's broke, the press will destroy me. I'll look like a gold-digging monster. I need to be smart about this. I need him to look like the bad guy. Another pause. I'm handling it, Chloe said, her tone suddenly smug. I've been seeing Richard. Yes, Arthur's cousin. Richard has always wanted what Arthur has, and frankly, Richard's trust fund is bulletproof. He doesn't actually work, so he can't get indicted for embezzlement. It's safer. Richard is my parachute. I just need to figure out the perfect way to jump ship without splashing the water. The recording clicked, and the audio went dead. The silence that rushed back into the study was deafening. Arthur sat frozen in his leather chair, the glow of the laptop casting long, skeletal shadows across his face. The pain he had felt a week ago, the heartbreak, the desperation was entirely gone. It had been incinerated, burned away by the sheer, unadulterated toxicity of the woman he had almost married. In its place, something cold, hard, and terrifyingly calm began to crystallize in his chest. Do you want me to confront him? Elias asked quietly, watching Arthur's face carefully. I can have my guys put pressure on Richard. I can leak the photos to the tabloids right now. Ruin her reputation before morning. Arthur opened his eyes. They were completely devoid of warmth. He looked at the photo of Chloe and Richard, smiling together under the awning of the restaurant. No, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, smooth and lethal. No tabloids. No leaks. Elias frowned. Mr. Pendelton, she is actively plotting to humiliate you. She is conspiring with your rival. If you let this continue. I am going to let it continue, Arthur interrupted, slowly sliding the photographs back into the manila envelope. She said she wanted to find the perfect way to jump ship. She wants a stage. She wants to look like the victim. Arthur looked up at the private investigator, a dark, predatory smile slowly curving his lips. It was the smile of a chess grandmaster who had just seen mate in 3 moves. She refused the courthouse wedding, Arthur murmured, more to himself than to Elias. But she hasn't cancelled it yet. She's going to use the courthouse. She's going to wait until I am standing at the altar, surrounded by my last remaining loyal friends, and she is going to spring her trap there. She wants maximum damage. And you're going to let her? Elias asked, bewildered. I am going to let her walk right up to the altar of her own hubris, Arthur said, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen. He handed the envelope back to Elias. Keep tailing them. Document everything. Let her think she has completely won. Let her build her little parachute. Arthur stood up, walking over to the window to look out at the rain-soaked city he still very much owned. He pulled out his phone and dialed his CFO, Marcus. Marcus picked up on the first ring. Jules. You get the package. I got it, Arthur said quietly. Call the event staff. Call the caterers. I want a small, pathetic-looking ceremony arranged at City Hall for this Friday. And Marcus? Yeah. Draft a press release. The biggest one in Pendelton Technologies history. We're going to announce the acquisition of Horizon Tech on Friday afternoon. At exactly 1:00 p.m. Marcus chuckled, a low, dark sound. Checkmate, boss. I'll get it done. Arthur hung up the phone. He looked back at the locked study door. On the other side of that door, his fiancée was sleeping soundly, dreaming of his cousin's millions, entirely unaware that she was about to walk into the most spectacular trap ever built. Friday morning arrived not with the golden, sun-drenched majesty of the Italian Alps, as originally planned, but with the suffocating, grey humidity of a sprawling metropolis. Arthur Pendelton stood in front of the full-length mirror in his study. The silence in the penthouse was profound. Chloe had left hours ago, offering no explanation and leaving no note, taking only a pair of oversized sunglasses and her phone. Arthur was not wearing the bespoke, ivory-white Tom Ford tuxedo that had been custom-tailored for a $5 million ceremony overlooking Lake Como. Instead, he had meticulously selected a 5-year-old, charcoal gray, off-the-rack suit. It was slightly wrinkled, the shoulders drooping just enough to suggest the posture of a man carrying the weight of the world. He ran a hand through his hair, deliberately messing up the usually flawless styling. He looked tired. He looked defeated. He looked exactly like a billionaire who had just lost his empire. The heavy study door clicked open, and Marcus Thorne walked in. The CFO was dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, his eyes scanning Arthur with a mixture of amusement and solemnity. "You look like a man about to attend his own funeral," Marcus noted, leaning against the doorframe and checking his matte black Richard Mille watch. "That's the point," Arthur replied, adjusting his collar, letting out a slow, measured breath. "What's the status?" Marcus pulled out his encrypted phone, tapping the screen. "The press release detailing the acquisition of Horizon Tech is locked and loaded. It's set to auto-publish to all major financial news wires, The Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg at exactly 1 p.m. The fake SEC hold on your accounts was officially lifted by our contact at the bank 10 minutes ago. Your black card is currently active and boasts a balance that could buy a small island nation." Arthur nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the guests?" "Elias managed the invites," Marcus said, a dark smile playing on his lips. "Only the inner circle. 4 of your most loyal board members, a few college friends who actually care about you, and me. I told them the bankruptcy is a temporary cash flow issue, but that you were devastated and needed support at the courthouse. They are all currently waiting in the lobby of Municipal Building C." "Good. Let's go." The drive to the downtown courthouse was a masterclass in atmospheric depression. Without the Maybach, Arthur and Marcus sat in the back of a standard yellow cab, the vinyl seats smelling faintly of stale coffee and industrial air freshener. The city rolled by, unaware of the theatrical execution about to take place within its bureaucratic walls. Municipal Building C was everything Arthur's life was not. It was a monument to mediocrity and fluorescent lighting. The floors were scuffed, off-white linoleum. The walls were painted a sickly, institutional beige. As Arthur and Marcus stepped out of the elevators onto the 3rd floor, the air smelled of floor wax, nervous sweat, and cheap perfume. Couples sat on hard plastic chairs, clutching numbered tickets, waiting for a board judge to call their names. Some wore wrinkled sundresses, others wore rented tuxedos. It was a place of frantic, unglamorous reality. In the corner, near a pair of frosted glass doors marked Chamber 4, stood Arthur's small group of friends. They looked entirely out of place in their tailored suits, glancing uncomfortably at the flickering fluorescent tube above them. When they saw Arthur, their expressions shifted to genuine, agonizing pity. "Arthur," whispered Sarah, one of his lead developers who had been with him since the garage days. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly. "I'm so sorry, boss. We're going to get through this. The company will bounce back." "Thank you, Sarah," Arthur said softly, playing his part to perfection. He looked at his watch. It was 11:45 a.m. Their appointment was at noon. "Has anyone heard from Chloe?" The group exchanged uneasy glances. No one had. The minute hand on the wall clock ticked loudly, echoing down the sterile hallway. 11:50, 11:55. 11:58. "Maybe she got held up in traffic," Marcus suggested loudly, his eyes betraying a predatory gleam. He knew exactly what was coming. At precisely 11:59 a.m., The heavy metal doors at the far end of the corridor swung open with a loud, echoing clatter. The ambient chatter of the waiting room died instantly. Everyone turned to look. Chloe Hastings had arrived. She was not wearing white. She was not wearing a veil, nor did she carry a bouquet. Instead, Chloe was encased in a violently sharp, blood-red Alexander McQueen power suit. The tailoring was aggressive, the shoulders padded, the plunging neckline dripping with a heavy gold chain. Her blonde hair was slicked back into an immaculate, severe ponytail. Her lips were painted a dark, venomous burgundy. She looked less like a bride and more like an executioner. But it was the entourage behind her that made Arthur's blood turn to ice, confirming every word on the private investigator's USB drive. To her left was Sylvia Rossi, the city's most notorious, vicious gossip columnist for the New York Chronicle. Sylvia had a digital recorder already in her hand and a predatory, hungry grin plastered across her sharp face. To her right, walking with an arrogant, slow swagger, was Richard Pendelton. Arthur's cousin wore a custom, pinstripe Brioni suit, his hands casually slipped into his pockets, looking at the dingy courthouse like it was a fascinating ant farm he was about to crush. Arthur's friends gasped, stepping back in confusion and horror. Marcus simply crossed his arms, leaning against the beige wall, watching the show begin. Arthur stood perfectly still in the center of the scuffed linoleum floor. He let his shoulders drop a fraction more. He widened his eyes, projecting total, heartbroken disbelief. "Chloe." Arthur's voice cracked in the quiet hallway. What is this? Who are these people?" Chloe stopped 10 feet away from him. The distance felt like a canyon. She looked him up and down, her blue eyes scanning his wrinkled, off-the-rack suit with profound, undisguised revulsion. "This is the end of the delusion, Arthur," she said, her voice ringing out clearly, perfectly modulated for Sylvia's voice recorder. "Chloe, please," Arthur begged softly, taking a half step forward. "I know it's not Lake Como. I know this place is terrible. But I thought we were in this together. I thought you loved me." "Love?" Chloe let out a sharp, brittle laugh that echoed off the frosted glass. "You dare speak to me about love after what you've done? After the lies you've told?" Sylvia Rossi stepped closer, her eyes darting between Arthur and Chloe, mentally writing the headline. "Billionaire bankrupt at the altar." "I didn't lie to you," Arthur whispered, forcing his hands to shake slightly. "The embezzlement was a blindside. I lost everything, Chloe." "You lost my everything." Chloe snapped, her composure slipping into genuine, terrifying rage. She pointed a manicured finger at his chest. "I gave you 2 years of my life, Arthur. 2 years of acting as your perfect accessory, building your public image, smiling for your investors. And you repay me by secretly leveraging your personal assets? You hid hundreds of millions in debt from me. You are a fraud. A pathetic, financially illiterate fraud." Sarah, Arthur's developer, couldn't take it anymore. "Hey. That's not fair. He is going through the hardest moment of his life, and you bring a reporter here." Chloe didn't even look at Sarah. She kept her dead, cold eyes fixed entirely on Arthur. "I brought Sylvia here because the world needs to know the truth. I will not allow my reputation to be dragged down into the gutter with yours. I will not have my name attached to a federal indictment, Arthur." She took a deep, theatrical breath, looking directly into the camera lens of the photographer Sylvia had silently motioned forward. The flash went off, a blinding burst of white light in the dim hallway. "I am officially calling off this wedding," Chloe declared, her voice dripping with practiced, tragic heroism. "I am a victim of your financial abuse and your pathological lies. I refuse to chain myself to a sinking ship, especially one commanded by a captain who scuttled it himself." The hallway was dead silent, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Arthur looked down at the floor, playing the utterly defeated, broken man. He let the silence stretch, giving her enough rope to hang herself twice over. Then, Richard Pendelton stepped forward. He walked slowly until he was standing right beside Chloe. With deliberate, agonizing slowness, he reached out and wrapped his arm around Chloe's waist, pulling her flush against his side. Chloe didn't resist. In fact, she leaned into him, resting a hand against his chest. "You always were careless, little cousin," Richard sneered, his voice smooth and dripping with aristocratic condescension. "You play with monopoly money in your little tech garage, and you forget how the real world works. Old money protects itself. New money burns. It's a tragedy, really." Richard looked down at Chloe, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Don't worry, Arthur. I'll make sure Chloe is taken care of. She deserves a man who actually knows how to secure a legacy. Not a man who gambles it away and expects her to live in a cardboard box." The photographer's camera flashed again, capturing the ultimate betrayal. The wealthy, successful cousin claiming the beautiful fiancée from the ruined, bankrupt tech bro. It was a tabloid masterpiece. Sylvia Rossi stepped forward, practically salivating. "Mr. Pendelton. Arthur. Do you have any comment on the allegations of financial abuse? Any comment on the SEC investigation? Are you prepared to face prison time?" Arthur remained silent, his head bowed. "He has nothing to say, Sylvia," Chloe said, a cruel, victorious smile finally breaking across her burgundy lips. She looked at Richard, her eyes shining with the promise of Park Avenue penthouses and black tie galas. "He has nothing at all. Come on, Richard. Let's get out of this depressing place. The air in here is making me sick." They turned to leave. Sylvia signaled her photographer to wrap up, having secured the scoop of the decade. Arthur's friends stood frozen in a state of absolute, disgusted shock. It was 12:59 p.m. Arthur slowly lifted his head. The posture of the broken man vanished instantly. His spine snapped straight. The trembling in his hands stopped. The desperate, heartbroken look in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a gaze so cold, so terrifyingly sharp, that the air in the hallway seemed to freeze. "Chloe." The word was not spoken loudly, but it cut through the ambient noise of the courthouse like a sniper's bullet. It was the voice of a CEO who commanded thousands. It was the voice of a man who held the executioner's axe. Chloe paused, looking over her padded red shoulder with an expression of mild annoyance. "What, Arthur? Are you going to beg? Because I assure you, it will only make this sadder." Arthur didn't beg. Instead, a slow, dark, predatory smile spread across his face. He reached into the inner pocket of his wrinkled suit jacket and pulled out his phone. He didn't look at Chloe. He looked at his CFO, who was already mirroring his exact, lethal smile. "Marcus," Arthur said, his voice echoing cleanly off the linoleum walls. "What time is it?" Marcus checked his Richard Mille watch, tapping the glass with a single finger. "It is exactly 1 p.m., boss," Marcus announced, his voice booming with unmistakable triumph. "The wires just updated." Arthur finally locked eyes with Chloe, his smile widening into something that promised absolute, unmitigated destruction. "Let's show the bride her wedding present," Arthur whispered. At exactly 1 p.m., the stale, beige corridor of Municipal Building C did not experience an earthquake, but the tectonic plates of power shifted just the same. It started as a low, synchronized vibration. In the pocket of Sylvia Rossi's designer trench coat, her phone buzzed. A second later, Richard Pendelton's phone chimed with a priority email alert. Then, the phones of all four of Arthur's loyal board members pinged in unison. Within 5 seconds, a cacophony of digital notifications filled the dead air of the courthouse hallway. Chloe Hastings frowned, her immaculate, dark red lips parting in confusion. She looked around the suddenly noisy corridor. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice losing a fraction of its theatrical confidence. Sylvia Rossi was the first to pull out her device. She swiped her thumb across the screen to read the breaking news alert from Bloomberg Finance. The seasoned gossip columnist, a woman who made a living out of never being surprised, felt her jaw physically drop. She read the headline once. Then she read it again, her eyes darting up from the screen to stare at Arthur, who was still standing in his wrinkled suit, looking entirely unbothered. "My God," Sylvia whispered, the digital recorder slipping slightly in her grip. "What?" Chloe snapped, turning to the reporter. "Sylvia, what is it? Is it the indictment? Have they issued the warrant?" Richard Pendelton slowly pulled his phone from the inner pocket of his Brioni suit. He unlocked the screen, tapping into the Wall Street Journal app. His aristocratic, arrogant smirk, the one he had worn since stepping off the elevator, froze. The color drained from his face with such sudden violence that he looked like he was about to collapse onto the scuffed linoleum floor. Marcus Thorne, standing effortlessly against the wall, reached into his sleek leather briefcase. He pulled out a stack of crisp, heavy stock papers, still warm from the printer. He walked over to Sylvia and handed her the top sheet. He then handed one to a trembling Richard, and finally, he extended one to Chloe. Chloe didn't take it. She crossed her arms defensively over her red Alexander McQueen suit. "I am not reading your pathetic legal defenses, Marcus." "Oh, it's not a defense, Ms. Hastings," Marcus said, a dark, rich amusement rolling through his voice. He let the paper flutter to the floor at her stiletto-clad feet. "It's a press release. Sent to every major financial institution, news outlet, and shareholder on the planet." Arthur took a slow, deliberate step forward. The illusion of the defeated man was completely gone. He stood tall, his shoulders broad, radiating the absolute, terrifying authority that had made him a billionaire by the age of 30. "There is no SEC investigation, Chloe," Arthur said, his voice smooth, cold, and echoing with finality. "There is no embezzlement. There is no rogue partner. And my accounts have never been frozen." Chloe stared at him, a sudden, frantic fluttering of panic rising in her chest. That's a lie. Your cards declined. The Maybach was repossessed. The penthouse. The cards were temporarily transferred to a blind, unlisted trust. A simple administrative hold Marcus executed at my command, Arthur explained calmly, as if presenting a quarterly earnings report. The Maybach was returned to the dealership because I ordered the new armored model for next year. And the penthouse? I own the entire building, Chloe. No one is taking it. Then why? She breathed, stepping back as if she had been burned. Why would you tell me you were bankrupt? Because, Arthur said, his eyes narrowing into cold, unforgiving slits. I needed to know if I was marrying a partner, or a parasite. He paused, letting the word hang in the air like a guillotine blade. A stress test, Arthur continued. That's what we call it in software development. You push a system to its absolute breaking point to see where the hidden flaws are. You see if the architecture holds, or if it collapses under pressure. You, Chloe, collapsed in exactly 3 days. You set me up, Chloe stammered, the realization finally breaking through her armor. Her hands began to shake. She looked down at the press release on the floor. The bold, black header stared back at her. Pendelton Technologies announces cover $12 billion acquisition of Horizon Tech. Arthur Pendleton's net worth projected to double. He didn't just set you up, Richard finally spoke. His voice was entirely hollow, devoid of its previous aristocratic sneer. He was staring at his phone, swiping frantically through the financial data. Horizon Tech. Horizon was my primary commercial real estate tenant. They anchored my entire downtown portfolio. If Pendleton Tech absorbs them, they'll break the leases. They'll move to your campus. Richard looked up at Arthur, absolute horror etched into his features. You just wiped out 20% of my family's revenue stream in a single morning. Consider it a consulting fee for taking the trash out of my penthouse, Arthur replied without missing a beat, not breaking eye contact with his cousin. Richard stepped away from Chloe as if she were suddenly radioactive. Wait, Chloe gasped, her eyes darting frantically between Arthur and Richard. The golden parachute she had so carefully woven was unraveling in real time. Arthur, this isn't fair. You lied to me. You pushed me away. I only went to Richard because I was terrified. I was trying to protect our future. Stop, Arthur commanded. The sheer force of the word silenced her instantly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive, holding it up to the harsh fluorescent light. Do you know what this is, Chloe? Arthur asked softly. She stared at the drive, shaking her head mutely, her breathing growing shallow and panicked. This is a digital copy of the voice memo you left for your mother from the back of a cab, Arthur said. He watched the last remaining drops of blood leave Chloe's face. The one where you called me a pathetic loser. The one where you proudly declared that you were using my cousin as a parachute so you wouldn't have to visit me in a white-collar prison. Sylvia Rossi let out a loud, breathless gasp. The digital recorder in her hand was picking up every single syllable. The story had just mutated from a standard bankruptcy to the most spectacular high society betrayal in a decade. And let's not forget your little shopping trip, Arthur added mercilessly. Chrysler and Sons, right? You tried to fence a 5-carat flawless diamond for pennies on the dollar before the feds could seize it. Did you really think you could walk into the diamond district with my custom lasered stone and I wouldn't find out? Arthur, please, Chloe whispered, her voice finally breaking. The arrogant, untouchable gallery curator was gone. She was trembling violently, tears of genuine terror welling in her eyes. I made a mistake. I was scared. You know I love you. We can fix this. Please, let's just go home. Let's go back to the penthouse and talk about this. You don't have a home to go back to, Arthur said coldly. Your bags were packed by the staff this morning. They are currently sitting in the service alley behind the building. The security codes have been changed. The joint accounts are closed. Chloe turned wildly to Richard, grabbing his expensive pinstriped sleeve. Richard. Do something. You promised me. You said old money protects itself. Richard Pendleton looked at the woman clutching his arm. 10 minutes ago, she was a beautiful, vindictive trophy he had proudly stolen from his rival. Now, she was the toxic epicenter of a public relations nightmare that was actively bleeding his family's fortune. With a look of pure disgust, Richard peeled her fingers off his sleeve. Don't touch me, Richard snarled, smoothing his jacket. You are out of your mind if you think I'm dragging my name into this mess. You played your hand, Chloe, and you lost. Without looking back, Richard turned on his heel and fast walked down the corridor toward the elevators, desperate to call his brokers and stop the bleeding. Richard. Wait. Chloe screamed, taking a step after him, but the elevator doors were already sliding shut. She was alone. Sylvia Rossi tapped her photographer on the shoulder. Shoot, she whispered frantically. The camera flash erupted, blinding in the dim hallway. It captured Chloe Hastings in her aggressive red power suit, standing entirely alone in the center of the scuffed floor, her face twisted in an agonizing mask of total devastation, humiliation, and ruin. Ms. Hastings, Sylvia said, stepping forward, thrusting the digital recorder toward her face. Any comment on the revelation that you abandoned your billionaire fiancé over a fake bankruptcy? Do you have a response to the allegations of gold digging and attempted theft of a custom diamond? Will you be returning the ring, or will Mr. Pendleton have to sue you for it? Get away from me. Chloe shrieked, swatting at the microphone. She hid her face behind her hands, sobbing hysterically as the camera flashed again and again. Arthur watched her break. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel joy. But as he looked at the woman who had happily planned to destroy his reputation to save her own skin, he felt a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. He had survived. He had cut the cancer out before it could take root. Arthur turned his back on her. He walked over to his small group of loyal friends, Sarah and the board members, who were staring at him in absolute awe. "Lunch is on me," Arthur said, offering them the first genuine smile he had worn in a month. "I believe there's a 3-star Michelin place down the street." "Boss," Sarah breathed, shaking her head. "Remind me never, ever to cross you." Arthur chuckled softly. He walked past Sylvia, past the flashing camera, and past the sobbing, ruined woman kneeling on the linoleum floor. Marcus fell into step beside him, clapping a hand on his shoulder as they walked toward the exit. "A very successful stress test, Mr. CEO," Marcus noted as they pushed open the heavy glass doors of Municipal Building C, stepping out into the clearing afternoon air. "The system is secure, Marcus," Arthur replied, adjusting his wrinkled suit jacket one last time. "Let's go back to work." 3 days later. The storm had hit the city with biblical force. Sylvia Rossi's article in the New York Chronicle was not just a front-page feature, it was a cultural phenomenon. The headline, "The Million-Dollar Question: How a Billionaire's Fake Bankruptcy Exposed Society's Biggest Gold Digger," had gone viral globally. The article detailed everything: the courthouse ambush, the intercepted voice memo, the attempted sale of the diamond, and Richard Pendelton's cowardly retreat. Chloe Hastings was utterly radioactive. She was fired from the gallery via a cold, 2-sentence email. Her friends blocked her number. She was uninvited from every gala, every charity dinner, and every networking event in the hemisphere. She had become a cautionary tale overnight. At 8 p.m. on Tuesday evening, Arthur stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, holding a crystal glass of Macallan 25. The city spread out beneath him, a glittering sea of lights and endless possibilities. The penthouse was quiet, smelling of cedarwood and bergamot, exactly as he liked it. The intercom on his desk buzzed gently. Arthur walked over and pressed the button. "Yes, Thomas," he said, addressing the head of his building's private security team. "Mr. Pendelton." "I apologize for the interruption," Thomas's voice came through the speaker, strictly professional. "Ms. Hastings is down in the lobby. She bypassed the outer gate by tailgating a delivery truck. She is demanding to come up. She says she won't leave until she speaks to you." Arthur looked at the intercom for a long moment. He took a slow sip of his scotch, the smoky liquid burning pleasantly in his chest. He didn't need to see the security cameras to imagine her standing down there. He could picture it perfectly: the ruined makeup, the desperate, pleading eyes, the sudden realization that she had thrown away an empire for a parachute full of holes. She wanted closure. She wanted a chance to manipulate her way back into the golden cage. "Thomas," Arthur said quietly, pressing the button down. "Yes, sir." "Escort the woman off the premises. If she resists, call the police and have her arrested for trespassing." "Understood, sir." "Have a good evening." The intercom clicked off. Arthur Pendleton walked back to the glass, looking out over the empire he had built with his own 2 hands. The air in the penthouse was perfectly climate-controlled. The silence was absolute, and for the first time in a very long time, it felt entirely peaceful. Checkmate.